question, when you put these random things together, then the question is there a set over and beyond its elements? Okay, if you want a very loose analogy, it is I have many objects in my hand, I put it in a bag, and the question I'm asking is there something to the collection of these things, let's say 3 apples and 3 oranges, is there something to the collection of this thing over and beyond just those members, 3 apples and 3 oranges? Now if you have a material bag into which I put them in, obviously there are 7 things at least, 3 apples, 3 oranges, and the bag in which you put in. But when you look at it conceptually as a set, the question was, should you make a commitment to the existence of a set over and beyond its members? Now those of you who have already engaged with this question of the social can immediately see a very striking parallel. If the social, and this has been one of the most defining questions, as you know, not just in philosophy of social science, in any idea of the social, does the social reduce to the members of that social? Okay, this plays out in various kinds of methodological individualism, all these theories of individualism. Do you understand a society only in terms of its members? Or is there something more? So when I say ontologically more, the ontology of the social is to suggest to you that when things are put together, there is something else which happens. And yet another entity comes into being, which could be the social. How do we make sense of this? And therefore, in the debate on the philosophy of sets, that if you look at whether there's a set over and beyond its members, you will find, it's not really a mathematical question, it's a philosophical question. You don't really need to know anything about sets other than these basic ideas. You will find there's a very interesting entry into the question of this social. So I'm not going to enter into this larger question, except to very briefly indicate to you the kind of questions which comes from this also includes the kind of questions about null set. Can you have a set with no members? And remember, null set is not a mathematical concept. Suppose I tell you this, there are no members, there are no Nazi members in this room. I am actually saying something, and this is a larger, very interesting question, a philosophical question again of negation. How do you make sense of not terms? But suppose I say there is a set of empty set of Nazi members in this room. I am basically saying there is a set. How do I make sense of this? And remember that ontology doesn't come, and I want to re-stress this point. The question of ontology is not a disciplinary perspective. We are not asking this question from the question of philosophy or social science or whatever. It's a way in which we talk about the world. We make an ontological commitment. Every time we speak, there is an assumption of an ontology. You cannot escape. When you say there is no set of Nazi members or fascists in this room, I am making a commitment to the existence of null sets. That is, things which are empty. And therefore, the null set is a very interesting question because it seems to suggest the possibility of groups, aggregates being there without members. That is, you cannot reduce a member, a social, just to its individual. That is the very important question which comes from that. But you can then raise this question and ask in the context of the social. The social consists of a variety of aggregates. And really the social begins with a variety of aggregates. You could start with family. Family, as many sociologists would like to see, Asiatic societies, the unit of society being family. So let's look at families as one kind of an aggregate. You will have caste as another aggregate. You will have religious communities as another aggregate, political community. So what we are basically doing in the very idea of the social is to be able to understand what does it mean to talk of different individuals coming together. And that's why, as I said, this constant tension between making sense of togetherness by breaking up into individuals. Okay? That tension we have to keep in mind. Now, if you look at what constitutes a family, in principle, what is a family? A family is a set of members, is a set of individuals, that's all. So in a sense, there is no reason to invoke an ontology of the family. What do I mean by the ontology of the family? Just to re-emphasize that there is something over and beyond its members that captures this idea of the family, right? Which in principle means even if members are not there, family should be there. That may be difficult, hard to understand. But the question is, that's the contention we are making. When we talk of the ontology of the social, over and beyond its members, is there another entity? So family is very interesting because it not only has members, but there is also a set of relations which characterize these members. And these relations are very specific kinds of relations. They could be, in today's words, we would like to call them as genetic relation, but I would also like to point out these relations are material. They're all materialized in some form, like genetic and so on. Because you could ask the same question to now, let's say, a caste group. So you have a caste group, a community of people who belong to what is called as the same caste, who belong as a caste group. Now what is this ontology of caste then here? Because you have a set of individuals who constitute that group. The question of relationship is very different from that of a family, but you may want to use certain ideas like the family, but you'll have to ask the question, when you say there is something called caste, what else does it have like a family? Other than its members, what is it that begins to characterize it? So these are the kinds of questions you can then ask about, larger questions about society and so on. So the ontological question is to ask a very simple, but for some of you maybe a meaningless question, is asking, are families real? You know, not people. When we talk of families, you know, look at our ontological commitment, and that's what I mean by ontological commitment. We make assumptions about ontology in our ordinary talk. You don't have to be philosophers to be using ontology. When you say there is this family and that family, we talk about it as if it's real. In what sense would we mean that families are real? Or do you mean by that families are just a shorthand for the set of a collection of father, mother, brother, sister, whatever order it is? Is that all that constitutes a family? And remember, already in the question of family, there is a very interesting question. That is, if one of the members of the family dies, you would still have the family. So a family is not immediately reducible just to its members, because remember, if a set of 3 of us are here, one of us leaves and the other 2 people form a set, those 2 sets are different sets. But the idea of a family does not seem to become different if 1 or 2 members of the family are no longer part of the family. So the way we talk about it, see, we are all already philosophically present. We have already made the commitments. Then you can't say there is no, I don't want to engage in these philosophical categories. Because then it is just a blindness, you put a blindness and say, oh, those are not there. But we are just saying that what philosophy is going to do is to bring out the presupposition when you talk about families and communities and groups. So while it is in the context, very quickly, well, I won't go into this, but there is, the problem in these families and societies, etc., other than individuals, there's a set of relations which characterize them. And much of society, the social, is also understood in terms of this relationships between individuals. The real problem in philosophy is to understand the ontology of relations. It's particularly in Western philosophy, it's been a long history of understanding the ontology, if you like loosely, the reality of relations. What kind of status do relations have? In other words, let's say there's a father and daughter. There are 2 objects, A and B. So father and daughter is present, but you don't have, other than the 2 of them, a relation of a father also present here, or relation of being a daughter present. So the ontology of relations is in general a problem, so that is something you might want to look at this stuff. So, okay, so largely, therefore, let me very quickly then come and address these 2 points about how it is possible, how actually there are ways in which we understand this larger kinds of entities like society and other things. First of all, even in the context of perception, there are different philosophical schools which allow us to engage with this question in different ways. For example, there's a whole school of intuitionists and mathematicians who believe they can see a set. So the perception of the togetherness is not always inferred. You can actually perceive it. So you have on the one hand a very famous mathematician like Cantor, who claims that he can see a set as clearly as he sees a chair, whatever that means. Then you have the whole Nyaya tradition, which will argue that they can see universals, the essences of objects, if you like, as clearly as they see the objects, to which the Buddhists, of course, respond. And then thirdly, you can also have a whole domain of natural science, which perceives the unobservables, things which you cannot see, like atoms and quarks and so on. So the point about, I think the great challenge to the ontology of the social is for me, is for us to understand that there are ways of understanding and capturing what exists in social reality which are far beyond the perception. Because there are models for understanding this, and there are ways by which we can do it. One way in which people have been talking about, which I'm sure some of you know this well, but the way in which the social is distinct from the individual is that when many individuals come together, there is a property of emergence which happens, and emergence then begins to characterize. So emergence is a very interesting phenomena which is, has a lot of play in both sciences and philosophy, which is about how the possibility of new things appearing which are over and beyond the individuals. That is, things, when you put individuals together, things happen which you cannot predict from the individuals alone. And that is the collective action. How being in collective creates something new. And that is really, if you like, the spirit of the essential. Okay, so I'm going to skip to many of the things I wanted to say, but come to this last point, which is that, well, okay, very quickly, if you want to look at social reality, you know, things like what exists in society, not as perceptual but as inferential, that is, you have a model of inference, so the question of reason becomes extremely important. And what I'd very briefly wanted to point out is that all of reason, what we call as a larger sphere of reason, I have something earlier, which I also did something on the TIS on Leibniz's principle of sufficient reason, going up to Kant, in order to understand this question of reason. Because all the ideas of reason which is invoked in these matters all reduce to notions of essentialism. And essentialism is an extremely problematical idea, as many of us know. And a very useful way for us to understand this question of ontology of caste was to look at the ontology of race and its relationship to essentialism. And essentialism also becomes one of the most important aspects of science. And you know, the point about essentialism in the context of race and caste is actually a way of discovering a social reality of caste and race in societies. Even though in the context of race, the debate is race does not exist, but race can be constructed in a particular way, and because of this kind of essentialism. And there is a very interesting line through Kant, etc. You know, many of you, I'm sure all of us are very respectful towards Kant, etc. You know, we have done our obeisance to him enough, but it's also good to see something else he said about, I don't want to be nasty to him, but I'm just to broaden our understanding of Kant in all his phases. You know, Kant's project was particularly harsh towards the Africans and the Negroes of Africa, the women. And you know, this statement is very interesting because in the context of race and caste, this is a very important comment. Kant's comment that, quote, "This fellow was quite black from head to toe, a clear proof that what he said was stupid." You know, and Kant actually has this great investment in his idea of reason in actually supporting essentialism and racism in a very fundamental sense. So the argument here is how the idea of reason is actually used to invoke, create an ontology. That's the point. What reason is doing is it is showing us something which is there, you know, as present in some sense. And that is done through, now through genetics and so on. But that's really, I'm going to skip all that and come to my final point, which is a very short point, which is actually about the question of discovering social reality through a way which I think is you know, extremely useful to us to consider, because it's very often we understand social reality in that way. And this is actually through language. And when I invoke the question of language, when I'm talking about reality and language, it is not like the Sapir-Whorf idea of language and concepts cleaving the world, showing us different worlds. And I just want to suggest to you, those of you who are interested in this, actually to look at, you know, Searle's, you know, the philosopher of language, on one aspect of his idea of language. And I'll just very briefly, quickly read this, because it's a very short comment which I've written on his work on you know, language and social ontology, which is a piece which many of you will find on the net, and it's part of his work on social life and language. And what Searle is trying to understand is the existence of social facts, that there are these what he calls as institutional facts, and so on. But basically he's trying to understand where do these social institutional facts come from. But basically the point he wants to make is this, and what he wants to suggest is that languages create social entities first. And the idea is that language is the first existent, if you like. A very problematical idea, but something which actually shares very deeply with some issues in philosophy of natural science. So Searle is suggesting, as an example, he suggests that we have a social contract with the use of language. He points out that, quote, once you have a language, you already have the social contract. So these arguments lead him to claim that language is the fundamental social institution. Now, why I like this aspect of Searle is because, to me, one of the most difficult ideas of the social is the possibility of collective action. Everything about, okay, let me just therefore end with this. The real problem in conceptualizing one aspect of the social. When we talk about the social as a collection of individuals, and one of the most difficult questions to understand is, the individuals are private in a very fundamental sense. The concepts that you hold, the thoughts you have are private and individuated within me. And they are not available, like I can shake your hands, but our thoughts cannot shake hands together. We will have to be what they are, and you have no access to that private space. But language in some sense does this job of sociality. Now that's a very easy move. This is what the Nyaya, there's a wonderful Nyaya argument about language and sociality. Why language is already social, and that's what makes intersubjectivity possible at all. But the point, and again, you know, Merleau-Ponty and others are built on very similar lines, but the question about this kind of way of Searle's understanding of collective intentionality through language, which means people act together because of this collective intentionality present through language. This question of language therefore leads us to something far more important and essential between the relationship between the social and language. But then there are major questions about the existence of the language, what kind of existence it has, which I won't enter into. If there are any questions, we'll look at it in greater detail. So all I'm saying is that very briefly in this approach is to actually motivate many of you who are interested in this question, and questions, particularly those of you who are interested in questions of social action, to actually understand these philosophical ontological presumptions which are present, and whose understanding, whose clarity of which will actually help all of us to be more meaningful agents of social change. Thank you.
Thank you, Sundar, and sorry for hurrying you through. But I think a range of very many interesting questions have come up, both about the kind of inquiry is entailed when we are raising the ontological issue, but more along with that also I think a whole set of suggestions about what is the social and how might we really think about a category called the social and the collective that it incorporates. I think more on that yet to come. And this is already, I think, to my mind alone, has thrown up so many questions that we must keep that time aside for questions. I'm going to request Professor Gopal Guru to make his presentation. I'm going to keep everybody down now to 20 minutes.
Yes. I must appreciate the efforts made by Dr. Babu and really for making this discussion possible this morning. We had a difficult time, particularly these two people had difficult time to locate, search for a good place where one could have meaningful dialogue about the space and time. But the space is shrinking in JNU, so it's not a good sign to produce social. Social actually is facing a lot of challenges. I would take about 15-17 minutes to make some quick points, direct points, which will have some bearing on what Babu was saying in the initial remarks. What is the role of epistemological turn and then your ontological turn to understand societies in questions, and also reflect on what Sundar was saying about the ontology of the social. The question that I would like to start with is that why is that, in what sense caste is social? Caste as a very discrete social reality divided into 3,000 and odd caste, and yet we consider it as the approximated reality as social, and therefore to make sense of this social, we have to take ontology as the starting point to really look at the specific as caste. So I think ontology is something about specific, very concrete, which is existing there in society, in the world. So it's something about very, very concrete. What is existing is the question of ontology. And why it is existing is another question in the same framework. There are two questions in ontology. One is what is existing and where it is existing and why it is existing. Why is a political question. So we are not going into the ontology of the political. We are studying. Maybe we'll reserve it for some other time. So is there a tension between epistemology and ontology therefore? If I am starting with a concrete as given social reality there, am I really privileging ontology over epistemology? Because in epistemological journey, you need not necessarily start with the concrete. You can always start from the abstract and a priori. You can start, mathematicians do it in logic. So do you necessarily, what is your starting point? The starting point as far as caste is concerned could be the given thrown into the system. So that is the question that one has to deal with. Is there a tension between epistemology and ontology? And if that is the tension one has to address, then how does one really look at certain disciplinary practices? Have they really answered this question? That is another challenge that one has to face. But I'm not going to answer this question. What I'm most specifically troubled about why we require to discuss ontology is again this experience in Bombay University and Tata Institute of Social Sciences. Some students said, and some faculty was also responsible, saying that why should we study philosophy? And more specifically, the lower caste and Dalits really do not require philosophy. And they were actually making case for reality as self-evident without requiring any additional surplus description, either theoretical or philosophical. Now, is it an existential question? Is it an ontological question? That we don't require any elevation. And I was a bit shocked because this question was really something which was really depressing. I mean, do women require philosophy? Do Adivasi require philosophy? And other castes require really philosophy? Because our empirical existence experience is self-evident. Because it has some morality attached to it, and morality makes your existence self-evident. You don't require any kind of theoretical building on it. I think this is if that is the case, why do you require any kind of metaphysics of emancipation or collective social action? And ironically, these are the people who require metaphysics more urgently than anybody else. But I think that self-evidentiality of morality will not be a sufficient condition for emancipation. As we all know, otherwise that Phule, Ambedkar period wouldn't have written so much. Why did Ambedkar write about 35 volumes? And very rightly, Shomu said, it's a mystery. Caste is a mystery. Ambedkar says caste is a mystery. So you have to really foreground that mystery into your understanding. So I was really troubled as to why should they take this position? Why do they want to really stay in that existential condition where they exist? So that was and so do they really, is there any way to really understand this? Therefore I thought, we'll have some discussion in JNU. Of course, JNU doesn't hold this. JNU students don't hold this position, I think. Anyway, somebody asked me this question. There is an ontology to this meeting, in the dialogue. Dialogue we had in Kashmir is a dialogue which is actually self-enchanting. It is a collective awakening to what is happening as social. And this is therefore ontology of dialogue. You are actually involving yourself into producing something. And so in JNU, for good reasons, we do not have depressing statements and observations like we don't require philosophy. The very fact that all of you have come in a very big number here at this point of time is the evidence that we really are interested in such things. But then one has to understand why such impulses, assertions are becoming a possibility in the recent times. Is the question that one has to ontologically answer. I don't want to really dwell into what is the larger aspect of ontology, and Sundar has very ably elaborated that it's really becoming warm. Can I just keep it here if you don't mind? So, the problem is this, that when you are saying that you don't require any additional surplus meaning to your reality, then what are the other people doing? Those who are also the part of that larger social reality. They also see that ontology for you, epistemology for us. Let me explain this. I did say that theoretical Brahmins and empirical Shudra in some different sense in 2002. Some students ask me, sir, what is happening? What is ontology of the social? Is it something philosophical? Or is it something anthropological or sociological? It means collapsing epistemology into anthropology and sociology is something which is ontologically different. Inferior, therefore. This is their perception. Not, I hold sociology in great esteem and anthropology. So that ontological differentiation in a very Heideggerian way is there in everybody's mind. So it is both mutual. I don't want to be the part of an abstract world of ideas, life of mind. Similarly, others also do not want to be the part of that. And that is the tension on the university campuses. And one has to address, not JNU again. Okay, so this is the background. The question is, do those people who are caught in questions have any need to walk? Do they have option, either philosophy or not philosophy? I think those who really want to go for the complete understanding of the social and emancipation, possibilities of the emancipation, they have to say that yes, they want philosophy of some kind. I want to read this one. Why very observation is not outside the ontological? Why very observation is not outside the philosophical? And you made that very insightful comments in your TIS presentation, that very utterance that we don't want philosophies are really philosophically constituted. And that is a profound, and then we can't escape. Every utterance, every word that comes from your mouth is basically philosophically loaded and pre-constituted, foregrounded. And I'll just read a para. The question that needs to be raised here is, does the above observation, that is that we don't want philosophy, exist outside theoretical philosophical frame? The answer is definitely no, as I already answered. This is because the lower caste, and I wouldn't say subaltern, that is as beings becomes being only in and by reasons of their limitations. This is important. You become being, and you realize that being because you are also aware about your own limitations. What are the limitations? That we do not want philosophy. The reasons of limits becomes the grounding principle for you. You can't escape it. Therefore, no matter what you say that we don't want philosophy, we are happy with empiricism, M.N. Srinivas and Quine, others have said this, so we don't really require any theory. Itself is theory. So you just can't escape it. There's some ontological thinking already working here, and you just can't escape it. And that is the emphasis I want to put on this notion of limits. Thaliath, and I'm just taking now